Is clutch a skill or is clutch a trait? Because if clutch is a skill, you can train it. If clutch is a trait, you're born with it or you're not, right? And we heard that from a lot of scouts when we were talking to them, and even coaches. Why did this player not make it to the next level? And we would hear, oh, they couldn't cut it. They didn't have it. And it's like, okay, well, what's it?
All right, here we go. We are live. Welcome to another episode of the Constant Sports Podcast. And today we're diving down a fun rabbit hole for you sports junkies out there, sports business, entrepreneurs, etc. And we have Dan join us today. What's going on, Dan?
Yeah, all good here. All good here. We're rolling. Beautiful, beautiful Toronto. Not as cold as everyone thinks.
Shout out Toronto in the summertime here. So looking forward to it. And like I said, today we're getting into the can you actually measure clutch aspect, the key concept here that really has been kind of a big mystery in sports for quite some time. And you hear coaches say, GMs, whatever, say, he or she's the gamer. They just have it in them. You can't teach clutch, etc. And what Dan and the team are creating is really a way to kind of actually measure how an athlete performs under pressure, different rankings, scores, valuations, if you will. And so we're really going to get into that aspect of it. And Dan's the founder of NTangible, this Canadian-based sports tech company. As he said, shout out Toronto there, and really building what could become one of the most important aspects of athlete evaluation, development, and everything in that vein. So, Dan, why don't you go ahead and kick us off here? And really, one of the key questions, obviously, all entrepreneurs ask when they're building the business is, what's the problem? And how can I solve it? So what's the problem and how is Dan solving it?
Well, I appreciate it, Connor. I would say the problem, and again, this is personally from my lens. Played professional baseball for a few years. I helped run Canada's first data-driven training center, where we had the first Rhapsido and the first hit tracks in Canada, and even before the Blue Jays did, where they would send some players our way to do some testing at the time. But I come from a player dev background, more so than anything else, where you see a problem with an athlete, you figure out interventions on how to improve them because you measure, you test and retest over time, and then they're a better athlete. So, I'll use the example of weighted ball training for pitchers, right? Velocity development has been massive across the board over the last 10 years. Before it was such a taboo subject, now it's just commonplace. But it's a mix of things, right? You don't just pick up a 2 pound ball, throw it a bunch of times, and have a set standard, and expect that's going to increase your velocity. It might be a part of it, but there's so many other bifactors towards that go to the ultimate goal of I've increased my velocity by X amount. The same thing applies, in my mind, on the cognitive side. The issue has been, though, throughout history, it's been almost a carte blanche black box that nobody wants to touch, and the people that have been involved with it have been given, a bill of health to say, yeah, what I'm doing is working without, true quantification towards it. And so, what Intangible's goal was to put your cognitive skills to an accurate and verifiable number, with the idea that if you have the ability to measure where you are, you can compare it against your peers, you can test and retest over time, and you can figure out ways to improve upon it. So that was really the main genesis behind the idea of Intangible, was to finally put something that was totally qualitative to a quantitative aspect, with the ultimate goal that once you can identify it, then you can start to train it and then build upon it from there.
And you mentioned, from in the past and throughout history has we've kind of been in the sports space that a few people have kind of entered the space and it's just they've given the green light and everyone kind of says, okay, yeah, they know what they're talking about or they've built XYZ product. But how come I guess just this mental performance, sectors remain kind of just a blind spot, so to speak?
I think twofold. One, we don't know what we don't know, and that's just human nature. And a lot of times, the unknown kind of is fearful. We're fearful of the unknown. And so, cognitive anything is usually the last thing in the totem pole because we can't feel it, we can't touch it, we can't smell it, compared to, a wearable where you can see if I put something on the end of my bat, I can get a whole bunch of metrics on my swing, or I can see something in real time with kicking a ball, and I've got the sensor within the ball to see how far it's going. So those kinds of aspects, I think, have held this development back. I think the other thing has been Similar to doctors, I think sports psychologists have had a similar um, stigma towards it in the past. So, if I go see a doctor, I must be sick. Like that, this is just kind of commonplace. But in the past, not so much anymore, but in the past, it's been if I go see a sports psychologist, there must be something wrong with me. And while that's not the greatest way to approach things, that was how things were approached all the way leading up to, again, I would say 8 to 6 years ago. And so with that, there's a stigma barrier that has to be overcome. But then, secondly, we just haven't had a way in the past to verify what we're doing on that side has actually been working outside of, again, very qualitative data points and understanding. So I'll use the example in professional baseball. Professional baseball is the sport that has the most mental performance staff members across any professional leagues. It's also the highest turnover position across that sport. And the reason for that is, again, I believe because of a quantification issue. If right now, if someone, how do we determine if someone's doing well in that position? It's, well, they're playing well, one, and oh, they feel more confident at the plate. They feel good. Things are going well. But when things don't go well and they're not feeling good, who's the issue, right? And it always reverts back to the one that isn't being paid $4 million in a minimum salary, right? That's
Yeah.
the issue. And that's, again, I think that's why we have the highest turnover position at that point. So there's a multitude of factors that have kind of led to this issue in the market. But the beauty of Intangible, and one of our goals, is we can test as young as 13 years old. And the earlier you get this data in front of these kids, the more understanding they have as to where they are and where they compare. And if you view it similar to a report card or any of the other physical metrics that we've had available to us, you can now come to an understanding of what you need to do in order to get to that point of improvement. Or at the very least, the kids that always feel like they're going D1 and parents believe that through and through across the board, well, physically you might be at that point, but mentally you may not be. And now we have the ability to at least have that understanding of what you need to do from an identification perspective and where you need to be in order to get there and perform when you get to that point.
I'm with you. And you're kind of bringing up the MLB and the mental performance coaches. It reminded me of the Yogi Berra quote when he says it's like baseball is 90% mental and then the other
Mm-hmm.
half is physical. It's like kind of that whole aspect, especially in baseball. It's just a different ball game as far as
It,
the
it,
mentality goes.
and if you want to dive even further, one thing we've seen with our data collection, and again, we're right now in 9 sports. We're going to have 20 by the end of this year, so we've got a pretty strong sample size across that point. It seems that there are mental genetic limits similar to what there are physically. And one of the questions that we asked ourselves when we started developing this test was, is clutch a skill or is clutch a trait? Because if clutch is a skill, you can train it. If clutch is a trait, you're born with it or you're not, right? And we heard that from a lot of scouts when we were talking to them, and even coaches. Why did this player not make it to the next level? And we would hear, oh, they couldn't cut it. They didn't have it. And it's like, okay, well, what's it, right?
Yeah.
And nobody has taken the time to actually try and define what it is and then be able to go ahead and backtrack through it. And so what I believe and what we've seen in the data so far is that actually a large portion of your score, around 60 to 65% of it, is a trait. You are born with these predisposed skills. And that's why some players have the ability to get into that mental state of mind easier than others, comparatively. But the top end portion of the score seems to be a skill, where that's your trainable portion. And what I mean from the genetic limit perspective is, and we've seen it with some of our talent that we've tested at the younger ages, if you score higher at the younger age, as you get older, you're more likely to move into that elite range because of that. Conversely, on the other side, if you start at a lower score, doesn't necessarily mean you can't improve your score, but it's going to be a lot harder for you to get to that point where you view yourself in the same light as some of those other players. So from that, that's where I say, even if your mental genetic limits are at a certain point, the more you're able to improve those skills, the better player you're going to be regardless. But it is interesting that, you know, I'll give you an example. The highest scoring softball player we ever tested is a 14-year-old who plays for the 18U national championship team for Lions Fast Pitch. Um, she's tested 30 points higher than the nearest AUSL player that we've tested so far in the pro league, and I saw a name and a number, and I go, who the hell is this? You know,
Yeah.
and then we come to find out that she's already signed her first NIL contract. She's starting 4 years up, even though she's not physically as strong as these other girls, and she's hitting like 330 4 years up, and she's already pre-committed to a top Power 5 D1 program. So, like, as part of all of these processes, you know, we can start to see why these players are doing so well at these younger ages, and then it just backtracks on another piece of data that we just didn't have before, other than, you know, the physical stats that we had prior.
Wow. That's I'm shocked a little bit. That's crazy. I've never heard of someone that dominant that young of an age, and obviously having the stats and the the evals to kind of break it up. And it's kind of walking us through the next point of kind of this clutch factor. So walk us through that. It's built out, the score, kind of how that all works. We talked about it a little bit, but
Sure.
yeah.
So it was developed by myself and our team of psychologists led by Dr. Ed Levine, who's known as the godfather of industrial psychology. He helped create the Myers-Briggs assessment and was part of that team. Older gentleman, big sports fan, and the genesis behind clutch itself was that it's still somewhat considered a taboo subject, right? Some folks in the analytics department believe it's random and it can't be measured. Some say it doesn't exist. But when you talk to every coach, every scout, and every player, does not matter your sport, and you ask them if they played around players that were so much better physically gifted than them, and then during playoff time they just wouldn't show up. And everyone has an experience like that. It could even have been themselves as well. And we don't have an answer as to why, other than just, oh, well, it happens, right? Again, throwing
Yeah.
that word
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so and so what we did was we built out the assessment based on the science of projectives. I don't know if you know the Rorschach test or the thematic apperception test. The
Mm-mm.
Rorschach, the ink
That's
blot test that you've seen in maybe some
Yep.
FBI movies. So
Yep.
you're given pictures with no definitive outcomes in order to elicit
Okay.
responses from those people and gain as much insight into their mindset. So what we've done is we've taken that measure that's been used throughout history in the clinical side and put it into a sports context where you're given pictures with no definitive outcomes. There's no right or wrong answers. And we ask you who you are in the situation, what's happening in the situation, what are you thinking and feeling in the situation, and what's going to happen next. And the keywords and phrases that you use, the semantic way in which you use those phrases, and the phrasing associated towards the literature within our scoring guide shoots out your aggregate clutch factor score. And the beauty of our assessment is these pictures have been identified as clutch situations within those sports, sometimes positional specific. And every time you take the assessment, you will never get the same situations. So we provide some variance and protective measures against trying to game the test, which
Yeah.
again,
Cheat the
we have.
system. Yep.
Well, again, it's hard to do, but with any assessment, you have to be cognizant and try and protect yourself against that. And so from that score, we found some very strong predictive correlations to outcome performance, both within high leverage moments in our baseball and softball sample, general statistical correlations in soccer, higher XG, in baseball, lower ERAs, higher batting average with runners in scoring position, things of that nature. And we've also seen some really strong college commitment correlations. I can tell you flat rate out of the 9 sports, if you're a high school athlete that scores above a 750 on your clutch factor, you are 2 times more likely to commit to a Division I program. If you score at the collegiate level above an 800, 73% of all those kids we've tested so far are all American or all conference selections. And again, this is just purely what the numbers are telling us. And when we get that data in the door, we are not doing a correlation to physical metrics whatsoever. It's purely a name and a number, and we backtrack from there. So this is being used heavily right now with our collegiate partners in the recruiting space, NIL conversation, scholarship conversation. We've also started to see this in the transfer space for some of our soccer clubs that the professional level that are using this. And I would say coming soon, the NIL collective has really started to take off for our business, with the idea of this being a determination towards bigger contract valuations, um, almost as a protective measure. Now, I don't want to go to say this is an insurance policy, because
Yeah.
this is just one piece of, this is literally one piece of the toolbox. We are not we're not everything, right? And nor should this be used as the sole deciding factor. But if you're deciding between two quarterbacks that are both valued at $5 million and the NIL has to write checks for it, which one is going to be the one that puts up or shuts up when you need them to? Which one's going to mesh well best with your coaching staff and your system and your beliefs? And which one is most likely going to stick around and not transfer out if they have a good year? Which again, in this world is very much retention is the best case scenario overall.
No doubt. That's yeah, that's just another aspect of kind of, I guess, speaking to that in a broader point of, building a business. And I'm sure, a few years ago you didn't even consider, or maybe you didn't consider kind of the transfer portal and that being a whole new, model with the collectives and, these colleges trying to use these predictive measures to, I guess, with their assets, essentially with the players, and build those out. That's crazy. And a new industry awaits.
Yeah, well, it really is the wild, wild west right now, and who knows who's to say that NIL is around in the next 2 or 3 years, or NCAA sports as we know it is the same, right? I think because there's so much flux, um, the organizations and colleges and universities that are taking chances on technologies like ours and are really putting in the infrastructure needed to get a step ahead are the ones that are exactly doing that. And the ones that are not trying to change or improve their systems and processes, these are the orgs that are being left behind in the dust by some of these newer colleges that are working themselves up in the ranks.
Good point. Good point. And speak a little bit to the. You mentioned you're at 8 or 9 sports, but now you're going to 20 by the end of the year. So that's in a few months here, 6 months, give or take. So that's quite a big leap. What's that been like?
Yeah, well, we've just been able to fast track our build out times. That's really it. With the beauty of AI automations and leveraging large language models for us, data collection, gathering, and validation on our end has just become so much easier. And so, because of that, it really is just sitting down and gathering that initial subject matter expert information. I'm getting too much in the weeds, but basically, once we talk to folks and learn the sport and get a better understanding, then we can identify the clutch situations within it. And once we do that, we can start the process of what that build out looks like. And I'll give you an example. We have a lacrosse assessment coming out soon. That's our next sport. I had absolutely no idea that men's lacrosse and women's lacrosse were basically two entirely different sports.
Yep.
They use the same
Yeah.
equipment, same ball, same net, somewhat
Drastically
same
different rules.
positions, like vastly different. And so for us, um, those interviews and learning the concepts of these sports is super valuable to gain an understanding and insight as to what you actually are looking for. And so, as part of that process, we want to make sure we're doing it right. But 2020 is going to be by the end of this year, and those will be including tennis, pickleball, golf. I'll be at golf. If I talk to 100 golfers and ask for what
Yeah.
you think a clutch situation is, I'm getting 100 different responses. And then wrestling, and after that, I mean, we're starting to pick at straws there in terms of the water polos of the world, and individual track and field, discus, like
Yep.
those.
Yep.
But and those will come, but those just take a little bit more time, and we're going to the major sports and the major revenue earning sports first for growth.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, naturally, and I think a lot of those other kind of off market kind of sports you call them. It's smaller sample size too. You got to talk really get a hold of a lot of people, and but that would be interesting. That would be interesting.
Yeah, and sometimes smaller sample size doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means you have to make sure exactly what you're trying to identify is specific enough towards that sport.
Good point there. And I want to touch a little bit. I like, asking people the AI questions. So just because I think it's so fascinating with businesses now, because you can automate things, move quicker, and like even you alluded to, just the fact that you've been implementing some of these things. And so where in kind of the sports tech landscape, we'll call it, how do you think AI is going to affect kind of the future of just the sports tech businesses, entrepreneurs, things in that vein?
I think the question, I mean, on the back end, it's already taken over, and if you're not involved in it or it's not heavily part of your processes, again, you will be 3 to 5 years behind if you don't have that within your systems in the next 6 months. The question to me is actually going to be revolving around taking all that data ingestion and putting it into something that is contextually used by players and by coaches. And the example, again, I'll use a baseball background. There's been some front offices, notably, where the manager kind of just became a placeholder position, where the data analytics teams would make pitching changes on the fly based off of a phone call from upstairs. You know, I feel like it's almost swinging back to where it was, 5, 10 years ago, where, yeah, we'll take it into consideration, but coaches are still going on their gut feel, more or less. And Major League Baseball actually just outright banned AI usage within the dugout recently
Oh,
in the
really? I
last
didn't, I
few
didn't know
weeks.
that.
Yeah,
Wow.
because people were asking some of these internal large language models, how's he going to pitch me next at bat? And it would give you, well, based off of all the data we have on this guy, first pitch
No
is probably
way.
going to be a slider. Like but those are the kinds of things which this technology allows you to do, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still leverage that data. It just means you're going to have to figure out ways to contextually use it in a better opportunity. So I think that's really going to be where the next companies or the next technology companies come in, is instead of just providing all this data, you have to come in and now provide ways in which you can use it in an easier way that's both human but also applies to the overall intended outcome that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, breaking it down, like I said, contextualizing it, and I feel like kind of like not dumbing it down, but getting it enough to where it's concise, to where you can explain it so everyone's on the same page. Because I mean, the amount of data we can scrape is insane.
Well, I can speak to what we're doing. On our end, you know, we started as a testing company where we could identify these data points. Then we built out a supplementary assessment called Interpret, which can identify the personality driven traits and factors towards these athletes. Again, providing more information to coaches and to provide for their understanding. Well, instead of just providing the data, we had coaches come to us and say, okay, well, it would be great if I actually knew how to use this. So we built out a coach's assistant in our dashboard that ingests all the data and provides targeted suggestions towards how to communicate better with those athletes and those players. A lot of coaches use the assistant for post game conversations, harder conversations, good conversations, pre-game practice planning. Like all those things have taken our data point from a this is nice to know to okay, this is very useful to me on a day-to-day basis because I feel that contextual need and want. And that's also expanded now into something where we have a player and a parent app launching quite soon, which will have a contextual agent within it that I don't want to say acts as a sports psych in your pocket, but it's pretty darn close to that without the clinical aspect towards it, where you can open up about your situation and what's going on within your specific sport or game or just life in general, and it knows everything about you on the contextual on the cognitive side. And what you're able to do is provide very targeted, curtailed, and personalized suggestions and um, opportunities for these players to not only improve themselves just by opening up, but you're going to create a positive opportunity for them to improve in their processes and what they're trying to do. And the same thing goes for parents. Parents don't know what they don't know, and they think they might be talking to their kid the right way, but that
Not
doesn't
even
necessarily
close.
always, yeah, exactly. It doesn't necessarily land. But with us, we've actually built out something where, okay, if you as a parent have all the understanding of what makes your child tick cognitively, you can then approach conversations or long car rides home after a game way better. And if you do that, can you create a net positive benefit and outcome going into your next game or practice for your athlete? Or are you going to create something where it ruminates into something that could be quite negative for their development? So again, taking data ingestion and putting it into a contextual output where there's a humanized aspect towards it for that positive development.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. And transitioning a little bit into kind of just building a business, creating a company, being the entrepreneur yourself. When I always love asking the question, when did you realize Intangible really, was going to become a real company, a real successful business? Early on, did you always believe it, or were there a few moments that you're like, all right, here we go?
I heard recently from a entrepreneurial podcast that you need to be delusionally optimistic in order
Love
to
it.
be successful. And I think in my case, for everything that I've done, playing career all the way through with a body that never wanted to hold up, I worked my way up to playing before it broke down as much as I could, to being a Canadian who started playing collegiate baseball in Canada, always wanted to play in the US, and finding a way to do so, to starting this idea and then building it into something where, you know, we had a bunch of roadblocks in the door of people saying, "Oh, this doesn't exist, it's not possible," but being again delusionally optimistic that, "Oh no, we'll find a way and we'll make sure it works and go from there and grow this into what it is," has led to that point where we've started to see, that growth and outcome success. So I think for me, continually pushing the narrative towards what you're trying to achieve, believing in yourself as much as possible, even if others don't. And again, having that aspect of this will succeed if I work hard enough for it. Usually, more often than not, the world is lazy and we support laziness more than anything else, unfortunately. If you work hard enough for something, you usually can get two steps ahead of everyone else. And I feel like that's kind of the story of Intangible.
Beautiful there. And then kind of on the heels of that, as well as, you know, being a founder, what were kind of, or what's one of the biggest kind of lessons you've learned as a founder since you've been doing this for a few years, building a business here?
Believe what people do and not what they say. I think the, in the world of business, a lot of people that you meet will say a lot of things, and they all sound great on paper, but sometimes things on paper do not translate to overall outcome goals and success. And I think you need to have, as a founder, a barometer of what you're trying to achieve and what your vision and goal is. And if things get in the way of that, or things don't really align to that endpoint, then you can decide to make that change right away, or at the very least, maybe find other partners that you're working with to that will create a better environment, because it really is the people who you surround yourself with and the early partners that you bring on that'll help you drive the success of this business into whatever that next stage is.
Well said. And then in the founder vein, do you have certain founders that you've kind of modeled your business aspect acumen from, in that sense?
Well, I'm lucky enough that some of our angel investors I feel very strongly about and view them as my mentors. One of which is Jeff Hastet. He's the owner of Breakthrough, which is a digital marketing company based in Michigan. They are very much working in, yeah, I think they're now over $100 million in revenue on an annual basis. But he literally built that from the ground up with his co-founder from nothing. He quit his job, which was a nice, cozy job in marketing and sales, and said, "I'm going to do this on my own," and literally went door to door for each sale across the board, living hotel to hotel, under the belief that he could just do it. And when he first started asking for VC money and angel money, nobody was giving it to him, and now he's turning down offers from people trying to acquire his business and telling them nicely to F off. So, like I feel like, he's definitely been a great mentor of mine, because our stories are very similar. At least I feel that way, and I look highly to that. I think in the sports space, there's a lot of people that you can look up to, just because, especially in, again, the player dev space where I'm from, the driveline baseballs of the world, and the Eric Cressys of the world, who again basically built a full system and process from literally the ground up, where it was just kind of this unknown, and seeing that come into fruition, I think is it's very insightful, but it's also something where you can learn from their growth and their projections and some of the mistakes that they made in order to improve upon it. Because when you're trying to build something new in sports, not everything that happened in the past went according to plan. And so because of that, you know, your entry point might be, you might think it's X, it turns into Y, and you can kind of see what's happened in the past and how that's led to that point.
Yeah, I love it, and it's awesome that you have kind of a lot of those people in your corner. I think that's, just for not even entrepreneurs, just everyone have those kind of circle five. It reminds me of the is it the Fab Five, like the commercial where you get your five close friends or whatever, and your Fab Five. It's kind of like that business relationships, whatever it is, kind of having that tight
Yeah,
group. It like you said, leading to that just speaks volumes.
it really is. Personal relationships take you, and that close knit circle takes you to that next level. And if people are in that knit circle and they're kind of pulling you down, maybe they aren't the right people to be part of that circle, depending on what you want to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. And then so how does it work? Do athletes sign up on a platform, app, website? Walk us through an athlete's point of
Yeah,
view, or coaches.
right now it's a B2B2C model. So we at the youth level we've partnered with some major showcase organizations and tournament leagues. Alliance Fast Pitch is the biggest partner at the moment. They are the largest softball tournament company in America with 50,000 girls running through their tournaments every year. Actually, in a few weeks, we're going to be testing 20,000 girls across the board over the age of 13, ingesting that data, providing leaderboards, rankings, all these reports for them to download the app and have access to it. But from that, it's going to be quite telling in terms of um, what the use case is, the usage is, and where the value truly lies, especially with regards to the recruiting conversation, where basically if you're an alliance player, these are where the top recruits play at the high school level. We do have some other partners in baseball and basketball as well. But from an athlete standpoint, if you're usually part of those orgs or part of those tournaments or showcases, you'll gain access to the report as just part of that process, and then you'll have the ability to go from there and start implementing uh, what we're able to provide you.
Got it. Very cool. Very cool. And then is that like you said the future going to a lot more events, showing up? Is that where you've seen a lot of your success there?
I think for our business, yes, as of this moment, if you told me with the new app launching, do we have a pretty good case to switch this to a B2C product where anybody can take the test? I think it's worth the conversation. I don't know if that's something we're going to get into at the moment because I do really believe the biggest sell for a product like ours is fear of missing out. And I'm an organization, I have this, you don't, you want to be part of my organization because of it. Um, Similar to college, right? I'm Alabama. I'm using them as an example, but I'm Alabama.
Sure.
Alabama's using this. Well, every other SEC program. Well, if Alabama's using it, then maybe we should use
Well, we
it
should
too,
use
right?
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just kind of the way sales in sports has always worked. But I do think, yeah, in the future we could be having a conversation where this does become a B2C product where anybody who's interested in gathering this data and getting tested and then having the support system available to you on the app is available.
Very cool, very cool. And so, kind of wrapping up here, Dan, what are kind of some, without any trade secrets, obviously, next steps? You mentioned almost, doubling kind of how many sports you're offering, but next steps, kind of with intangible, where you see the sector going. Kind of give you the floor here.
If you haven't heard of Intangible yet, later this year you definitely will. And without giving too much away, I will say soccer is looking like it's going to be quite the launch with a planned integration we have upcoming across the board. I think one thing you are going to notice is with any early data points, especially on the cognitive side, I don't want our business to just solely be measuring X, Y, and Z. I want us to be able to expand out. So, and think of this like an operating system for mental performance rather than just a one-off assessment for clutch. And so from that, we're sitting on outlines from our psychs on a return to play protocol for athletic trainers to leverage this and establish baseline cognitive scores and then retest over time before they're cleared physically to say, are you back to your baseline to be ready to play mentally as well? We're also sitting on an outline for what team chemistry meters and team chemistry ratings are. I've always
Oh,
used
very
the example, when you trade a player in NBA 2K when you're playing, your team chemistry bar goes down. And
yeah.
then if you're playing well, your team chemistry bar goes up. And it's like, well, could you actually do that in real life? What is the delta between winning and losing when it comes to team chemistry and those active measurements? So we are planning on having in the fall with some of our college partners some early data points to shoot towards proving out that we can accurately measure team chemistry and we can actually put a definitive factor towards how much winning and losing affects that on a daily or weekly or biweekly basis. Um, so those are just two examples, but I do think we're going to reach a point on the intangible side where it will be what you want to measure out of it. And if you are a team, you're going to have a suite of assessments which you can administer across the board where you don't have to go to multiple different vendors. We are kind of a one-stop shop for everything and all that is cognitive.
Perfect. And before we close, I just want to say I love the name Intangible. How many tries did it take the team to come up with the name?
It took a long time. One of our team members asked one of his marketing friends, who I believe he worked for Coca-Cola, to come up with some ideas, and that was one of them. And then we decided to actually use it, and the guy at Coca-Cola was like, "Wait, you actually use that? Really? You took it? That's what you went with?" And I said, "Yeah. Well, because we would talk about in our sales calls early, we're trying to measure the intangibles of these athletes, right? The
Yep.
things we couldn't measure." And then from that point, we just decided on intangible to be the
Yeah,
the
it's
title
wonderful.
name, and it's turned out quite well.
Yeah, no, it's one of the better names out there for sure, especially just like as an athlete, just knowing that, as you're saying, measure the intangibles. They have the intangibles. They have, the it factor. It's a perfect blend. So kudos to you and the team, and shout out to the Coca-Cola guy there. But we appreciate you coming on coming on today, Dan, and really diving into the world of how we can measure clutch and the future of it. And we're excited to watch the growth here of intangible here, you and your business and the team, and especially with some soccer announcements. Sounds like coming up soon, and going up to 20 sports here by the end of the year. So a lot of exciting stuff. And like I said, we appreciate you coming on, and thanks for joining us today.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks, Connor.
You got it. We'll see you.